I'll just procrastinate a little bit to let some more people join on. I know we're starting at the top of the hour. So what I'm going to talk about today is measuring Teams adoption, and really in the context of measuring Teams adoption, I'm going to try and highlight what we've identified with our customers as being best practice, some of the things that they do to really drive engagement, monitor how people are coming onto the system, as well as understanding kind of those types of engagements and actions that people take and that would be really interesting to monitor. The other part of the presentation will be actually talking about how we gather the information. So there are three fundamental ways in which we can gather information from Office 365, and I'm going to step through them, some by PowerPoint and some by live demo. I have to be a little sensitive that some of this information, the only way I could really collect it is from our own tenants, so I want to make sure that I'm not violating any secrets, if you will, by doing so. So that's one of the things that we'll be doing. And then following that, we'll open things up for questions and answers. So as people are onboarding, I'd like to some of the initial slides are, first of all, talking about the Microsoft 365 Collaboration Conference, featuring all three major platforms: Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, and the Power Platform. Looks like slides are automatically advancing, so I'll not have that happen. So the conference hopefully taking place live and in person next March. We're all very hopeful that these conferences will be once again not delivered by video, but also being able to be delivered in person, so we can all meet and perhaps have a cocktail after. Also like to acknowledge the generous sponsors. As you can see on the screen here, we were fortunate enough to participate in that sponsorship program. A little bit about me. So this is what I like to do when I'm not doing 30 years of technology. I'm actually a scuba instructor, in addition to enjoying scuba diving. I reside geographically. I know we're kind of from all around the world. I pinpointed us on the map. We're near Toronto, in a city called Waterloo, Ontario. It's kind of the mecca for technology. We call it Silicon Valley North. You may have remembered RIM Technologies with the BlackBerry, multi-billion-dollar company that really skyrocketed, and has gone a different route currently, but certainly it has breeded a whole incubation process within this the Waterloo region, and it's really helped organizations like ours who are ISV driven. So we manufacture software or software as a service, and having the resources available locally to be able to facilitate that is really quite outstanding for a fairly small community. There's about 500,000-600,000 people that live in that regional geography. A little bit more about me. So again, I've been in this business for about 30 years. You can probably see the gray COVID hair, and I started out actually in the telephony business. So what's kind of interesting is through my career, I've touched a number of different things with Teams. So back in the late 80s, I was with an organization, British Telecom, and we were talking about being able to deliver data over voice, which meant I would call you up we would establish a telephone connection, and then I could send you a file as that telephone connection happened. And it just really highlights kind of how far we have come from a technology perspective. And the concept of something like a Teams, where we can have a video call, we can be exchanging files, having chat, putting files into repositories like SharePoint and so forth. It was just that would be light years ahead of what we had dreamed of being able to do historically. Following that, entered into kind of the other dark side, which was the Lotus Notes IBM space. And we did a lot of work with unstructured data and really around the ECM business. We kind of threw in the towel in about 2003, 2004 timeframe and moved over to SharePoint. Actually, we were one of the first SharePoint users back in Team Services in 2001, and we had built some technology around that platform. And over time, about 2008 timeframe, really became keenly interested in the BI space. And as you can remember from the evolution perspective, SharePoint was a platform for delivering BI. So it was interesting to see, how SharePoint became the delivery mechanism, and then Power BI evolved out of that. I was part of the Power BI, the Microsoft Partner Advisory Council when Power BI first came in to play, and it was a revolution, to put it mildly, in terms of how Microsoft worked with the BI components, and the fact that it was more of a cloud-based solution, all to the point that our tyGraph product, we had several different directional paths that we could have taken with that product, and we decided to land on delivering all of our visualizations through Power BI, and that has turned out to be a really, really good story for us going forward. So a little bit more, my slides are, there we go, advancing now. So there's a raffle, and I encourage you to please participate. So you need 5 correct answers. If you come to our booth right now, I've actually had to shut it down in favor of this. So the answer for anybody who's online is just drop in a URL link, and that will be the answer in our section. But also please fill in the fill in the survey at the end of this call. There will be part of the raffle, so I will encourage you to do that. Secondly, from a philanthropic point of view, this conference has been very generous in donating 10% of all of the sponsorship money into the various charitable organizations, and I'd invite you to do the same. I do a slight repeat of the agenda, just for those of you who I know were coming from other sessions and joining in later on. So the first thing I'm going to talk about are the 3 different ways of accessing the Microsoft data, specifically around Teams. Now, of course, you can get all of Office 365 data vis-a-vis these methods, but we'll focus in specifically on Teams. Second thing I'm going to do is talk about the reasons to measure data, and this, as part of the talk, will become very self-evident. But oftentimes people will dive in and start ripping out data without really having a purpose in mind as to what to use that data for. And how you structure the data is really going to be dependent on some of the questions that you want to answer. And so the third component of this would be, which questions do you want to answer? So the top 10 ways of measuring Teams adoption. So really understanding kind of, from a Teams perspective, what are the really key things organizations will hone in on from a perspective of measuring things. Now, I will also comment that depending on where you're at with your Teams adoption journey as to what you want to measure. As an example, if you're just starting with Teams, you're going to want to see if the lights are on. However, if you're more mature down that maturity frame, there may be things that you're going to want to measure that are a little bit more detailed or a little bit more involved. And so what you want to do is create a structure that allows you to answer some of those downstream questions. And we'll talk a little bit about how we do that. The other thing that I will also point out is from a top 10 perspective, it may not be in order because your top 10 might be slightly different than somebody else's top 10, again, depending on your maturity model as to where you're landing with regard to measurement. So without further ado, we'll talk about the 3 ways to measure option. So the first one is the Microsoft Admin Console. And what this allows me to do is go in, and you have 2 roles that you can log into. So I'm going to go in as the tenant administrator and be able to go and look at the various workloads. Now, what I mean by workloads are, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, Yammer, etc. So that's what I define as a workload. And I'm going to look at that workload either as a tenant admin or as a reader role. So you'll have cards giving you some good telemetry data on how things are working within this environment. So I could, click on any one of these cards and do a bit of a drill down to see, what's going on more specifically. And then when I do that, as an example with Teams, you can see some channel information in regard to this. So a couple things you'll notice are we'll talk a lot about time dimensions because this is a really important concept when we're looking at how to measure any type of analytics. So, over time and what time period we're slicing on will become a very important topic. So the time dimensions afforded to you are 7, 30 day, 90 days, and 180 days. So what we're looking at too is kind of overall activity. So looking at messages, chats, calls, and meetings. So these are very good telemetry-based data points to be able to really understand, from a telemetry perspective, how is it going within my environment? But it doesn't get very much deeper than that, and that's intentional because there are other facilities that Microsoft offers to be able to get, if you will, more deep. So let's say you wanted to analyze this data. How would you go about doing that? As is often the case, Excel is your friend. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this data, we're going to export it out into an Excel format, and you will find that it's probably a little bit difficult to completely manipulate this within Excel. So oftentimes organizations will take this CSV file and we're going to pull it into another tool like Power BI. That allows me to do some multidimensional modeling, think pivot tables on steroids if you're very familiar with Excel. So that's the type of thing that you're going to want to do kind of downstream after you export this data. Again, you're subject to the type of data that is within here. So you can go ahead and sort and filter. So that's the administration center. And as you can see, telemetry based, kind of very, concatenated, if you will, in terms of the data that you get. There's not a lot of maneuverability around what you have. The polar opposite of this is the Audit Log Searcher Compliance Center. So what Microsoft also does is they take literally all of the audit data. So think almost every click that you have within a Teams environment, SharePoint, OneDrive, etc., and they're pumping it out into a part of the graph which is known as the management API. And so this data is being streamed, if you will, in a fairly high velocity into that environment, and there's the opportunity for you to go and collect that. So I'll talk specifically about some of this. The second piece of that is now this is a fairly recent announcement, but a development, is that they've given you this Audit Log Search Center. Now, please take note of this URL, and I'll make these slides available after, because this thing is like probably the price of admission. Actually, finding where you need to get in and look through this audit log. So it's protection.office.com/unified auditing. That's the vector that you want to get in on to go and get here. Once you're here, you're going to see a boatload of options available to you. So you would go in and hit, select. In this case, I'm focused specifically on the team's audit log. And then you can multi-click any one of these items. So you can see, delete a team, change organization setting, user signed into teams. I mean, you're going to see a ton of data with that endpoint, as you can appreciate. You remove members, add team, added tabs, added channels, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you can multi-select these, and then when you do, what it's going to do is basically pull that data down for you. And so that's a really nice UI that Microsoft provides to be able to go and get at that data. A couple of things in regard to Teams specifically, it goes back 90 days. So so you will get an endpoint when you start looking through your calendar picker from a date perspective to go and get it. If you can extend the limit, this is a new development as well, to either 6 months or a year. If you do that, it is actually for Azure Active Directory, SharePoint Online, and Exchange. Currently not available in Teams. So Teams, you get 90 days of audit level data available to you. So you can select one or many of the audit items, and this would be the output that you would get. So again, I've kind of had to do this to protect the sanctity of our data, but in this case, I've selected 3 different items here. I can see the person has logged in, and the various items, and if there's a device that's known, it will show. And then I can drill down on any one of these items. So I can look at this particular item, and you basically get a header with a JSON document associated to it. And this is where we get into this like very, very, very granular level of information. And again, everything about that transaction is literally logged within here. So if I were to export that, this is what it looks like. So compare this to the CSV file that I got out of the Audit and Compliance Center, which I said was very telemetry based. This is kind of the all-you-can-eat piece, right? So you have, as I mentioned, a header record, so the metadata. So this information is displayed on the screen, as well as the JSON document, which is all of the information about the information, so metadata, if you will. And this is the type of thing that you would then programmatically bring into a tool like Power BI, or in some cases you may want to throw all this into a SQL database or some other data factory repository. And then connect your data to that. So a couple things in regard to granularity. I mentioned a couple of these. It must be enabled. So one of the things that is not enabled by default is the audit. It doesn't cost anything. You just turn it on, and it does give you that whole transaction level pieces of information. So you are limited to 90 days by default. However, there's another little caveat to that. And in our experience, this is kind of 6 to 7 day retention. So there are 2 ways of collecting the data, which I'll get into. One is what we just did with the search center. The other one is through the APIs. And if you use the API, your data retention is only 7 days. So it kind of disappears from an API perspective after about 7 days. And then the org policy, you can move this to 1 year for SharePoint, Exchange, and Azure, not Teams yet. So how do we get this? So I showed you the audit log. The other way to get it is through PowerShell. So if I'm using PowerShell, I can connect to that data, and in the case of Teams, I can go and get up to 90 days worth of data and pull all that back. Now, one of the things that you will discover when you start using PowerShell is awesome for doing kind of these one or 2 types of data pulls, but to really programmatically go and iterate through the data, really the better way to do that is through the management APIs. You'll notice I changed my caveat to 6 days because you kind of have it's audit logs, right? So kind of what's in there. Think about for those of you who have used SharePoint audit logs and things of that nature. It's like a bucket, right? And we internally we call these audit buckets. So it's just a plethora of data that's thrown into a file, and so you have to go and pull all those files and then iterate through them. And it absolutely can be done programmatically. In fact, that's what we do with tyGraph. That's how we actually collect a lot of this data. But just know that, you know, make sure that you're keeping your sequencing up to speed if you're going down that methodology. So the third one, which I'm going to give you a little bit of a demo on, is usage analytics. So you know, we started with the Compliance Center. We're now looking at audit data, and kind of somewhere in the middle is usage analytics. So this is Microsoft going in and kind of doing a job around really getting that data distilled for you, so pulling it into a Power BI model. And there are a couple caveats about it, and like all things, there are different settings and permissions that are required for being able to access this data, and that's rightly so. You don't want to just, you know, organizationally push this out necessarily. So it does require a Power BI Pro license, and the reason for that is it is manifested as a Power BI app in the app service. I can show you what that looks like. And then secondly, they must have at least the reporting role. That's to get started. So once I connect my Power BI app to this data set, I need at least the reporting role or the attendant admin to do that. Then at that point, I can provide access to other users. And we'll talk a little bit about how things are updated and then show you what it looks like. And here's a quick screen grab. This is specific to all of the Office 365 workloads. The thing that Microsoft is really looking to provide you with is monthly active usage. So the MAUs score, that's really one of the things that is very important. So understanding kind of how your growth is happening from a month-to-month basis. So without further ado, I will. There we go. So first things first, if you're seeing this screen, you're on the old version. I like to point this out because a lot of organizations, they go and try to collect the data and they're using the old app. The version that you should be getting is this one. So this is the latest usage reporting, and it, you know, very nicely formatted as you can appreciate versus the old version. You know, a little bit more jarring. So I mean, this is like a 4 or 5 year old product. This is much more modern and a better way of viewing things. So the executive summary broken down into adoption, usage, mobility, communications, collaboration, storage, and then by workload. So you can see Yammer and Teams, etc. There's also an overview. So you can look again across these various pieces. So if I'm looking at the collaboration suite, which would be things like OneDrive and SharePoint, or if I'm looking at communications, which would be more around your Teams type of adoption, this gives you some good overview and information. Also around licensing, so understanding the total number of activations that have happened and the number of licenses that have been assigned over time. Again, breaking down by various months. Product usage, so Exchange, groups, OneDrive, Teams, etc. So we'll just focus in on Teams here, and you get a nice breakdown of number of calls, number of channel messages, number of chat messages, number of meetings, and participation within the meetings. And then I can go and focus on a specific month to take a look at what's going on within that month, and some good bar diagrams in terms of you know, kind of that growth over time. And then finally, user activity. This is where we're getting into a little bit more granular data. Remember the difference between kind of that very high level telemetry data and the super granular information. This is more summary level activity. It is pulling in certain metadata aspects, like the different departments that the information may be gathered from, the different countries. You can see you always have this challenge, which which is data based. So unlimited viz, unlimited viz inc without the decimal, and unlimited viz inc, or sorry, period, and with the period. So you'll always see that in your data, and then kind of the telemetry information in regard to all of the various components within teams. So so this is what is available out of the box. Now, what I'm going to do is just show you sort of some of the limitations, if you will, of this. So works quite well, but from a granularity perspective, one of the things that you may want to do is get into advanced filtering here and say, I want to see everything before or after. Oh, is this date? Oh, sorry, wrong filter. So I want to see everything that is on or after a particular date. So let's say I want to go to May 1st, and I hit apply, and I lose my data. Well, if I go back to, say, April 1st and hit apply, I see the data. So the reason this happens is that this data is summarized to a month level, and May has to, so on Monday, I would be able to get May's data. So Monday, Tuesday, June 1st or 2nd, May's data would arrive for me. But from a granularity perspective, you're dealing with a month of data, specifically around user activity. So so just bear in mind, I mean, that may be perfectly fine for your purposes, but that is one of the limitations of this. And then there are all the various different breakout visualizations around here. As you can see, like these are all hidden. So if you know Power BI, you can hide charts. Because I'm in edit mode right now, you're seeing all the hidden values. So there's quite a bit of information in here. Encourage you to check it out. So now that you have your data, what I'm going to talk to you about are the reasons you may want to measure team's adoption, and specifically zeroing in on the things like what's really going to make you a rock star, which was kind of the title of this. What are the things that organizations really hone in on? So first of all, whenever I do these presentations, I like to delineate between two very different classifications, if you will. Reporting. So reporting, think about all the questions you already have the answers to, or sorry, you already know that you want to measure. If I can use the metaphor of accounting systems because people can relate to it. So I've got, a balance sheet, an income statement, all of those things that you would expect an organization to have. And you'd want to have, like, think PDF or in the old days, barrel reports or green bar reports, those reports that have fidelity to them. And you know what you want to have answered. But then you have another set of reporting, which is analytics. And so what analytics allows you to do is drill in on certain aspects of it. So with reporting, you may have some drill features. So for example, I might, if I'm using a chart of accounts, I might look at, hey, expenses seem a little bit high over here. I drill through and see, the expenses associated to them. But that's not really providing me with a whole like analytics suite. Analytics allows me to really kind of drill and pivot and get deep into that data set. I will also comment that oftentimes with analytics, your default position is to go and rip data from those core systems. So as you can appreciate, if it was an accounting system, I would have my reports. I'd see there's a problem. I'd go into the database. I'd start running SQL scripts and ripping data out, putting it into Excel and start doing pivots, or putting it into Power BI and start pivoting on the data and looking for things. So so that's a very different and distinct distinction. So when you're looking at those three aspects of the services that are provided by Microsoft, you have to classify that into what problem are you trying to solve? Is this a reporting problem or is this an analytics problem? Again, a lot of what they provide out of the box is very, very sufficient for your needs. This is my soapbox. Your data needs to tell a story. And so what's super important about this is what story do you want to tell? And as I like to say, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And we've seen this, and if I can refer again outside of the topic, the whole COVID reporting. Nothing has been more evident for people to try and understand kind of what's going on. Is it safe to go out? Is it not safe to go out? Or, we're seeing test results as some of the proxies for, whether or not we're, winning the battle or losing the battle. And death rates and all these other different things, and people are forming opinions around it. But at the end of the day, really having that empirical data to support your effort or support your position is so important. And here are some of the questions in regard to teams where this is really kind of landing. Leadership will come to you and say, how digitally transformed is our company? Like, where are we at? Because oftentimes when we talk about digital transformation, it's like, yep, we're in, and yes, we're doing it, but how do I measure that? Like, what kind of empirical evidence could I put against that conversation to really drive that home? What does success look like? Benchmarking, internally, creating your KPIs. One of the fun things, especially when we're doing BI services, was that we would see organizations and they would create a KPI and it would turn out red, right? And it's like, oh, well, we just changed the base, and oh, look, we're yellow, or oh, look, we're green, right? So really developing, kind of those key KPIs up front is really important. And then some of the things that we do, as an example, are benchmark with other organizations. So, what does success look like internally, and how do I compare that with other organizations? How do I know I'm getting business value? The whole ROI conversation. And what that leads to is, should we continue to fund this project, right? Because, especially now, funds are getting tighter and tighter, and it's, is this driving a business outcome that really helps me? So, I like to use this, and it's taken from a slide from one of our, an MVP, Simon Denton, out of the UK. He works for a company called Mott MacDonald, and he was mapping sustained growth. And this is a bit of an old one, but oldie but a goodie, because one of the things he did was he was looking at events that we did in concert with the reactions that happen. So first of all, we're seeing spikes. So when they had a 31-day program to really drive adoption, they introduced a new brand in the organization, they introduced forums into the organization. So we can sort of see sustained growth over time. But then what he also noticed is we're able to actually retain that growth. So even though we had these bursty type of events, we didn't lose traction. What we were able to do is take that base of users and continue to grow on it. And the other thing that he was able to articulate out of this is this, the kind of the time period in which we're sustaining the growth. So, you can see right up here we had like this massive spike and then drop off. But again, retaining growth, and then the period of time in which we were able to keep those users on board. So being able to look at this data over a period of time, again, that time dimension coming up as a topic, was really, really important. And then finally, I love the Tom Peters line, which is, kind of what gets measured gets done. And what we found also is just introducing to leadership, especially, that we're starting to measure some of these outcomes, really starts to drive some interesting engagement. One of the things that we do for organizations is create things like leaderboards. So the so the senior leadership can start becoming competitive with each other, and you know, the fact that they're leaders makes them naturally competitive, and so being able to articulate that message to them, and really start showing adoption trends, you know, so just the fact that you're measuring has an impact on the fact that you're measuring. So that's the meta point here. So now I'm going to get into the top 10 list. And I'm going to give demos for each of these, but I'll just kind of outline this. One of the things that we look at when we measure teams is that teams does not live in isolation. Teams is part of an ecosystem, and to some degree is an ecosystem in itself, in that you have all of these different facets that are part of the team, and how they interact. So just from the pure Microsoft perspective, you think about, you know, the replacement of Skype over time. So when I'm measuring teams, I may see a drop off in Skype users. So, you know, is that good or is that bad? No, it's transformation, right? So back to that whole digital transformation concept. So if I'm starting to lose people in one channel, it doesn't mean I'm losing adoption. I'm gaining them in another channel. And then being able to kind of measure that content over time. So I'll stop there. I'll show you the next one, which is also introducing. Come on, advance. One more click. Trying to load. There it goes. So the next one is HR data integration. So the ability for us to not only slice by the metadata that's around the various Microsoft workloads, but also to slice by our organizational data. So I'll just stop there and then jump back into a demo. So this is a digital transformation scorecard, something that we have created. And I can take a look at the various aspects of this. So I can specifically focus on teams. So if I hit this, I can see, you know, kind of a nice band uptick in regard to how my teams are performing. So this is an aggregate model. We're looking at a number of different signals. And the way the scorecard is calculated is it's actually a weighted scorecard. So one of the challenges you have with digital transformation is this concept of, you know, email is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. You know, everybody uses email. They've been using it for years, et cetera, et cetera. But when you start to work with a digital transformation scorecard, if you weight it and downplay email and increase the value of things like Teams or Yammer, SharePoint, and OneDrive, those collaboration tools, it allows you to be able to look at your organization in a different way. The other thing that you're going to want to be able to do is, for example, and I'll just pick on department here, be able to slice by a particular department. So I can say, you know, show me my accounting department, and see the filter associated with that, or I can go into advanced filtering and I can just say it contains the word accounting, and apply that and be able to look at, you know, all accounting departments and how they are trending. There are different types of slicers here. You know, we provide a whole plethora of them, but the ability to look at, you know, city, continent, geography, et cetera. The other thing that is important with regard to this is, you know, where do we get that data? Azure Active Directory is obviously, you know, the best source for that, and we pull that in natively. But we can also pull data from other sources, because oftentimes Azure Active Directory isn't, you know, completely syncing with internal Active Directory for all those metadata fields that you want to pull in. Or secondly, it may not be, you know, as up to date as you like. So with that, we're able to pull data in from other sources of record. So two things. One, the digital transformation scorecard, again, looking across the entire ecosystem. And then secondly, having HR data integration to be able to measure your organization by different aspects. The other thing is measuring high potential adopters. So what do we mean by that? Let me just jump back to our demonstration. what we have noticed are behavioral patterns. So what we've got here is looking at the last 12 months of data, and again, I can slice this to whatever time horizon I want, and who are using, who are my users that are highly engaged with Teams. So this is all the kind of the Teams activity on aggregate. And if I flip this on its head, I see white space. So these are all the people that are not engaging in Teams. But what I do notice if I put them on the same line is I've got users here that are using SharePoint, OneDrive, and Yammer. And I would suggest to you, and this has been proven in data, those two users have a higher probability of coming onto a product like Teams if in fact they have already been identified as using some of these other workloads. Because if I'm using Yammer, I'm already using used to chat type of messages. I'm using SharePoint and OneDrive. Well, that's the container for Teams. It would make sense that as if I just transition that individual over, Skype would be another thing that you would want to look for. I'm going to stay away from people that are kind of email only. So if I've got somebody that's high in email but doesn't touch any of the other workloads, I'll probably stay away from them in phase one. So what you want to do from an adoption perspective is create cohorts of users that allow you to be high potential impact for being able to get them to transform the way you would like them to. So stay away from the laggards out of the gate. Monitor user churn. This one became super important as we moved into the whole work from home environment. So this is one of the visualizations that we put together actually within the last 60 days. We got two basic questions. I'm going to cover the first one right now, which is who's on and who did we lose? And these organizations were very genuine about this problem, right? So obviously we have user gain. So these are people that are net new again in this time period, which is in this case 30 days. So I'm looking at kind of this March time period, and these are the people we gain. So great. What do I want to do with those people? I want to send the success checklist. So here are the things that you need to do. I might want to push some training materials out to them, et cetera, et cetera. But these are the people they're really worried about. So these are people that in the previous 30 days had exhibited, the high use of Teams, and now we're gone, right? So, do they have issues with home connectivity? Do they have, hardware issues, et cetera, et cetera? So those were the people that are users that the organizations were really focused on. And then finally, we have the unengaged members. Those are people that we're going to want to pay attention to, but they're not in the first two categories. So so monitoring user churn is a very important technique. So number 5, understanding collaboration patterns. So let me drill into that and show you what we mean by that. One of the things that we do when we're looking at Teams are how people are engaging together, because it can really tell us some stories, as well as understanding kind of how the team is, the activity of the team over time, because again, the data is starting to tell us stories. So I can see if Fernando here and Scott do a lot of work together, so do Harry and Scott and so forth, but there's also a lot of white space in regard to how people are working together. So we give this another view. And what we're looking at here is organizationally, kind of all of those communication patterns. So who's connecting with who? Are there people that are dominating the conversation? Are there people that are kind of outliers from your organization? So this may be completely appropriate that they're just working off on silos, but it may be something a heads up to from an HR perspective to pull these people into the fold. And I can look at a particular team and its channels and see how they're behaving. So this one looks pretty healthy. I mean, you have this kind of web effect where a lot of people are interacting with a lot of people. There's no one person, even though some people are producing a lot of content. They're behaving as very much a cohesive team. we compare that to, say, a bar chart, right, where we're basically just looking at kind of the telemetry. It tells a different story, right? So this one, I'm kind of seeing who's reacting with whom, but I'm not seeing that team effect. So playing those out is a really good way to do it. The other thing that we do is take a look at activity over time. Where this became really interesting for us, as an example, is looking at some of these nodes, because your channels are often named according to what's happening in that channel, right? So in our case, we're shipping products, so we have diagraph for SharePoint, diagraph for Teams, etc. And we saw this massive spike uptick as we were pulling information, or sorry, getting towards a launch cycle, and after launch, it died down quite a bit because we started working on other parts of it. The other thing we point out here are things like, what are the tabs within a particular team, and kind of what's behind those tabs. In this case, we have a notebook, which is OneNote. Power BI reports, which happens to collect the Power BI, but it could also be something like Excel, etc. So really, very quickly understanding the dynamics of the team, both in terms of volume, how people are working together, and then finally what those teams represent. Number 6 on our top 10 list is identifying influencers. Again, I'll jump back into my demonstration for this. We've learned this over a number of years. One of the things that people think about when they think about influencers are those who, basically talk a lot. Those people who are posting a lot of information into the site, and we've determined that that's not really a good measure. A good measure is understanding, and we break this out for you. The 4 pillars, which is contribution, but so how much are you putting into the network? Of course, important. But flip side is what's the impact? Are people responding to your messages? So if you create a channel message, does it turn into a thread, a multi-purpose thread? What's the breadth in which you're posting? Is it just one team or channel, or multiple? And then finally, what's your reach? Are you interacting with 1 or 2 people, or are you interacting with many? Again, that spider diagram kind of lays that out for you. And I can take a look at my influencers. The score isn't so much important as the stack rank rating. And then I can also slice this by a particular group. So I can take a look at this running gulp mix group and see who my top influencers are. Again, using that HR metadata, I could say, who are my top influencers in a particular department. That's important because we really want to understand what's going on organizationally, in addition to specifically with teams and channels. The next is a device usage pattern. This is very simple. The ability to look at how people are consuming Teams. Are they using the client? Are they using the web? Are they using their phones? If they're using their phones, are they using their iPads? Are they using their iPhones, etc. So that mobility aspect of Teams and really understanding how people are consuming it will really help you target both training and user adoption. Another thing that we do is target unused teams for deletion. So what we can do, and I'll just flip over to that one. Whoops, wrong screen. So we have this concept of measure of active engagement. So what this is doing is it's looking at kind of a number of different signals, aggregating them together, and just saying these are the teams with a lot of activity, in air quotes. And if I flip that on its head, now you can see the real value of this. These are teams with 0 activity. So they have no they have channels and tabs set up, but there's just no activity going on. You can go and take a look at that one particular team. I can see the team owners. I might want to email them and say, look, you set up this team, hasn't had any activity. Should we go and nuke it? This is really important from a hygiene perspective. Keeping all of your teams, just the most active teams or active teams used in flight, is really important, because you want to make sure that people are, if they come to your organization, are working on just those teams that have some activity associated to them. Two more, one, sentiment and keyword tracking. So again, best to demo this. And this was born out of the events that have happened. Now, COVID wasn't part of the lexicon when this demo data set was built, so I'm using services to illustrate the point. But the idea here is taking a look at not only the use of that activity, or sorry, of that word, so we have the services word, as well as what's surrounding it, and the sentiment biorhythm. So first of all, when did this word enter our lexicon? Secondly, understanding kind of geographically where the word is being used, and then third, doing sentiment analysis around this word to find out if it's really super positive or really super negative. And this is kind of how would you, from a data perspective, get a feeling or a vibe for your organization or your teams and channels? This is a way to do it. In this particular case, we use Microsoft Cognitive Services to score every message. So we have a score weighting of 1 being the most positive, 0 being the most negative, 0.5 being neutral. It doesn't know the difference. And then what we do is we take that score, we append it as metadata to the messages, and then if you aggregate those over time, then you can really start seeing patterns. Of course, with any scoring methodology, it's going to have some tolerances to it, plus or minus. But again, aggregating it over time and then using it in analysis with other contexts can really give you some super interesting insight. And then finally, drum roll for number 10. Activity patterns per day. So one of the things that organizations like to understand is, when's the best time to post? And why do you want to do that? You want to land your messages for people when there's eyeballs associated to it. So what we can do is take, in the last 180 days, an aggregate score to see when the best time is to post. In this particular network, 5 p.m. Appears to be that best time. Now, because we deal with global organizations, we do this in UTC. So, there may be some adjustment. Your mileage may vary for this, but this would be the time where there's most eyeballs. And again, using cross filtering, we can take a look at a specific group and maybe get a different answer. 4 and 6 p.m., 5 p.m. isn't really high for this group, 4 and 6 p.m. And then using my influencer score, this is the person I want to send the message out. So, very quickly, I'm able to say, in this team and channel, this is my influencer, and this is the person that I want to post my message, and this is the time of day that I want to post that message out, so that it gets the most eyeballs. And with that, we are at time. I will open the floor for questions. We have a speaker feedback form using a QR code. You get to it, as well as event feedback for the organizers. And my goodness, again, I'll say it again. You guys have really taken on a monster task, and I commend you for being able to do that. Gillian, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ed Senez. I couldn't be so happy, of seeing that a powerful insight of what we can do to probably make our teams a better, in terms of the analytics, in terms of all the CXOs needs that data. I work for a company who always comes and asking me, all my CXOs, hey, can you probably import in a quick analytics around the top 10 team members or top 10 channels, or top 10 thread that you just mentioned, right? We don't worry about having just a text in the chat. We are looking for more insightness of that text, right? Maybe it
Right.
get converted to a thread, maybe how many likes and sentimental analysis that you just mentioned. I think this is just great out there for all of us to learn from you. And one of the questions that I see here is, can I get Power BI dashboard reports template used in your demo?
Yes. So I actually had that up. I cut it. Yeah. So go to appsource.com, .microsoft.com, and you can download all of our dashboards directly. So I've got it favorited, but if you just go into AppSource and type in tygraph, as the search. You'll see them if I could type. There we go. As I say, you'll see them coming up here. So we have 5 templates available. They come with all of the demo data that I just showed. So you're able to go and play with the data. It also has the data model, so you can go take a look at all of the different dimensions and metrics that we have. Sorry, measures and dimensions. My BI folks will spank me for not saying that correctly. And you can go and play with it. So the way that works is you just hit. There's a little video on each one of them. Give it some love and feedback, and then hit get it now. And then there's the Microsoft I consent. Once that's pulled down into your Power BI workspace, it will launch for you as a template app. And I just hit install and away it goes. So.
All right, so I know the security team is after each developer in the company. You be Microsoft developer or a any level of developer. If you are a developer, the next question that security team will have is it okay to download the template from appsource.microsoft.com? That kind of question. If you have some answers for us.
Sure. Yeah, there's nothing untoward to downloading that template. It does come with demo data. However, in order for that to become live, you have to connect to, or you have to become basically a tyGraph customer of ours. Sure. So, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to close that off. There we go. Yeah, so you'd have to be a tyGraph customer for us to actually collect the data on that. In that light, we either can deploy this into your tenant space so the data never leaves your tenant space, or we can use our full SaaS model, which case we do all the work for you.
All right, so what's the best way to reach out to you if in case the audience has any questions or some?
I will go back to slide 1. Email ed@unlimitedviz.com or at Twitter. Looks like I've neglected to put my LinkedIn up here as well, but just shoot me an email, and I'll be glad to respond.